Holy shit, yo, what the fuck? I actually won that? Hey, what's good everyone, I'm Og, and in this video, we're going to be taking a look at some old classic Flash games by the name of Sword and Sandals to find out if you should play it, if it's worth the cost, and if it's as good as you remembered. Now, everyone knows that back in the day, especially the early 2000s, Flash games were like the escape and addiction of every kid from elementary to high school. While some mainly played Fancy Pants Adventures and others played Toss the Turtle, I mainly played Sword and Sandals and Subway Story. Subway, eat fresh. So what's Sword and Sandals about? Well, since I bought the entire collection, we'll be taking a look at the entire package, starting with Sword and Sandals Gladiator. The first Sword and Sandals kinda starts off like this. You create your fighter and give him stats, learn that you're a pirate having a chat, crash your ship, ruin your trip, and now you end up in a fighting pits. So once you get into the actual game of Sword and Sandals 1, it's pretty basic. You got your weapons and armory as well as arena. If you win enough fights, you'll gain EXP and gold to increase your stats and improve your equipment. After a certain amount of fights, you'll be then faced with champions. If you manage to defeat the champions, you can use your weapons for your next upcoming fight. Rinse and repeat until you reach the final champ, and that's pretty much it for the story. Anything after that, it's all sandbox. Combat's pretty basic with turn-based mechanics and stamina management. If you run out of stamina, you'll go to sleep. And if you run out of health, you'll pretty much die. It's quite simple to play but can be difficult to beat because almost everything is RNG based. Even with a 70% hit chance, I somehow missed my opponent 8 turns in a row while a guy who's below me dropped me in a single turn. Luckily for me, the strategy in Sword and Sandals 1 are not that complicated. All I had to do was focus most of my stats on strength, and I eventually beat the game after a few tries. Sword and Sandals 2. So what sets the first Sword and Sandals apart from 2 is that 2 seems to have a lot more stuff. In fact, it's a lot more challenging. Not only can you get more choices and variety, you also got ranged weapons, enchantments, and even magic spells. Now, unlike Sword and Sandals 1, maxing out just one stat of yours isn't gonna get you very far. You gotta have variety, you gotta have change. If your opponent is melee, you gotta go ranged, and if your opponent uses magic, you gotta use tactics. Point is, you can't just go in there with a sword in hand and expect to win. But what you can do to win though is to use an ancient technique passed down for generations. Now, legend has it that this technique requires a lot of knowledge. So deadly that's been banned from being savage, known as the alternate attack, emotional damage, that some players would be considered cheating. It is charisma. So some of us may be wondering, why is this called emotional damage? Well, my young grasshopper, an old saying goes that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words, well, they'll break your spirit. And in Sword and Sandals, throwing an insult at your opponent hurts more than getting a chop to the groin. So if you get too frustrated, here's a quick guide to beat the game, assuming that you're willing to grind, because the process can be quite tedious. Leveling becomes much slower later on, and until you hit the required level, you won't be able to fight the next boss and the minions leading to them. So here's how it works. Give all your points to charisma and then verbally abuse your opponents with insecurities until you can afford to start investing into magicka and vitality for stats. Get better equipment as you go and eventually invest into the Molten Death spell. The more you have, the more damage you'll do. Sword and Sandals 3. Now this one's quite different from 2 and 1 in many aspects. When I say different, I mean like kind of strange different. Rather than being medieval themed, Sword and Sandals 3 kinda goes off the grid because you can now get guns and stuff too. Not only can you get guns, you can also customize your own winning quotes. See that guy with a big ass rod? Boom! I just beat his dick off. See that guy with barely any protection? I just penetrated. So aside from custom quotes, guns, and guitars for some odd reason, Sword and Ponchos 3 also has randomized shops with different enchantments. Not all are good, but it's definitely something different that will give players a challenge. But if you're like me who hates a challenge where it's just repetitive grind, then here's a cool money trick. Simply go to any shop, click on the item you can afford, click on inventory, and then buy it. You can do this as much as you want and basically become rich. Sword and Sandals 4 Tavern Quest. Tavern Quest is definitely the most different compared to the previous 3. While the combat system and graphics of Tavern Quest is pretty much Sword and Sandals 3, the gameplay is actually quite refreshing. Instead of just repetitive turn-based combat, Tavern Quest offers players an adventure. Simply roll a dice, land on a tile, and you'll be presented with lots of new stuff. Oh my, bro, are you kidding me? I just lost first place! There are also tiles that can lead to mini-games. A lot of mini-games. So depending on how you do and build your character, Tavern Quest was by far the most enjoyable for me. While it still can be considered pretty grindy, it's a lot less of a pain compared to the previous games, especially Sword and Sandals 3, where the scaling doesn't even make sense anymore. Okay, so If I just keep my distance and use spells, he can't do nothing, alright? He has to at least catch up with me. Okay, this is just ridiculous. Who let the yellow flash? So aside from minigames, Tavern Quest also allows the player to play up to with 3 other competitors. At the end of each adventure, depending on the map you pick, winners are determined based on many things rather than just winning duels. Sword and Sandals Crusader. When it comes to Crusader, there's a total of 4 different modes. You got Campaign, Quick Battle, Survival, and Conquer the Realm. If you pick Campaign, it's almost like playing a tutorial, as a lot of the story in the beginning is just mostly completing a task. While it can lead to a full-on gameplay of making money, raising an army, conquering the enemy, it'll be easier and quicker if players just select the Conquering the Realm. If you pick Quick Battle, it's pretty much just a simulation of 2 armies fighting. If you pick Survival, you're pretty much asking for defeat no matter what difficulty you pick, because there is no strategy. You go in there with a set amount of troops and basically fight stronger and stronger enemies until you lose with no way of replenishing your army. So if you wanted a full experience for Crusader, the best option would be Conquering the Realm. Once you get into the game, your goal is to take over as much territory as possible. The more territory you have, the more gold you generate, and the more gold you generate, the more soldiers you can buy to take over more territory. While the combat of this game may seem confusing, it's actually quite simple. Simply send out your strongest troops with their HP high, and remember to never send your archers out to the front lines. Sword and Sandals Mini Fighters. Mini Fighters is honestly kinda bad, because when you first open it, it's pretty much just discounted Sword and Sandals 2. Everything's fuzzy for some strange reason, and the combat feels even worse than the first Sword and Sandals. Sure, you got the elements of the previous Sword and Sandals like magic, potions, enchantments, weapons, armor, and even dice rolling. It's just not up to standard. The characters are constantly vibrating, matchmaking makes 0 sense, and sometimes the game just straight up bugs out. Dead fish. Poop on a stick, a hammer that squirts fart juice when you hit people with. Does this sound gross? Well, if you said yes, then good, because that's what this game is about. Gross Out. Gross Out is disgustingly entertaining. While the overall gameplay is pretty much Sword and Sandals 2 with a modern reskin, Gross Out has a completely different story. Rather than being a gladiator killing people to defeat this evil emperor, you're now a teenager or animal trying to stop an obese cowboy and his clones from destroying places. Instead of customizing your own character, you'll instead have to pick from a starting character. So is this collection worth it? Absolutely. You can get a total of 6 out of 7 games for the low cost of whatever this is. And on top of these, there are also mods that lets you go even further and beyond past the original story.